This is a report on the policing crisis and the prison industrial complex of the United States and Canada, as presented by Dominic, Ezra, Shauna, and Walter. The policing crisis, as described by Jill Lepore in her article The Invention of the Police, is that it is accumulation of 1,000 other failures. Failures of education, social services, public health, gun regulation, criminal justice, and economic development. It is not enough to seek change in just ideas or vocabulary. It is how we understand the world and act through meaning and feelings that must be restructured. A big part of this is realizing the dehumanization that has occurred planet-wide and the cultural changes that need to be made to fix this mindset. As Janet Reutman reminds us, crisis is a historical event as much as it is an enduring condition of life. It evokes a moral demand for a difference between the past and the future, and is a means by which history can be located and understood. This is true with policing and the need for abolition, as it is a result of centuries of genocide and oppression, specifically towards Black and Indigenous peoples of Canada and the United States. Historically, the police force's origins is rooted and tied to racism and slavery. The main reason for the creation of a police force was to capture escaped slaves, thwart uprisings and resistances, while also doling out punishment. The first modernized policing were overwhelmingly white male organizations that focused on responding to disorder of the classified dangerous underclass, consisting mainly of the poor, immigrants, and other racialized groups.
This othering and need to separate never ended, but only changed form over time. From slavery between 1619 and 1865, to segregation between 1877 and the 1960s, redlining between 1934 and 1968, to incarceration, starting in the 1970s and continuing to this day. The form may have changed, but the core has remained the same. When incarceration is geographically and racially concentrated, so are the effects of incarceration. This is what happened in California, as Ruth Wilson Gilmore explains in her book Golden Gulag: Prisons, Surplus, Crisis, and Opposition in Globalizing California. Over 25 years, California has built a new prison every year, despite the rates of crimes not rising. The location of these prisons were disproportionately located in majority white areas, limiting any opportunities for people of color to work within the prison system, unless they are the ones behind bars. Considering that the population of the United States makes up just 5% of the world's population, yet holds an astonishing 25% of the global prison population, it is easy to see that there is a clear crisis going on. Courts routinely defer to police judgment on some matters and interpretations, validating police behavior and leading to situations where police actions are left unquestioned and unchecked. As Desmond Cole says in his book, The Skin We're In, A Year of Black Resistance and Power, the police are just doing their job. A central responsibility of policing has always been to discipline black people on behalf of the ruling class. Today's incarcerated black people, whose criminalized existence feeds the state's courts, jails, and prisons, is the same as it was for black people forced to labor fields centuries ago. In the United States alone, the likelihood of a black man being imprisoned is 1 in 3, while for their white counterparts it is 1 in 17. These carceral societies associated with surveillance, behavioral correction, and social control are becoming increasingly associated with the militarization of urban spaces. As Desmond Cole points out, white people are essentially threatened by black pride and self-love. Since they can no longer shame them for being black, white people now complain that they make everything about race and accuse them of profiting from the phony racial distinction their ancestors created to marginalize them.
The prison industrial complex, named after the military industrial complex of the 1950s, is a term that draws attention to the ways that the U.S. prison system is integrated with for-profit companies and corporations and creates capital from prisons through this process, feeding into the monster that is capitalism. There is a notable similarity between slavery and the prison industrial complex, as the slave owners profited off the labor of their slaves, just like the prisons are profiting off of their inmates. As long as prisons are seen as a profit-making machine, criminals will be continuously created to fill them, perpetuating and continuing the cycle of inequality and racism. As Ruth Wilson Gilmore says, all capitalism is racial capitalism because it is a relation. Capitalism requires inequality, and racism enshrines it.
Racial capitalism and the prison industrial complex work in tandem with one another, which drives mass incarceration, revealing the prison system as a system of racial control. This carries over into the capitalist nature of the legal system, where being able to afford legal assistance provides an advantage in the courtroom, and having the requirement to pay bail and other court fines is exploitative. This all reinforces inequalities. Abolishing the policing system is needed to reorder the power structures involved with ability, care, and relationality. We can try to be all-inclusive, but perspective and perception are vital components to understanding. Abolition is not demolishing, but reorganizing how we live together in this world in a practical and achievable way. Abolition seeks to undo the ways of thinking and doing things that sees prison and punishment as solutions for all kinds of social, economical, political, behavioral, and interpersonal problems. Some of the ways in which abolition can be more effective than reform, as described by Clare and Woog, is by creating a power shift. This would ideally mean that social harm, like deciding what must be criminalized and how it should be punished, would be defined and managed democratically by ordinary citizens. This would also result in the removal of the capitalist ideology surrounding policing. Another way that abolition can be effective is through the defunding and reinvesting of the annual police funds. The funding then could be invested into harm mitigation strategies instead of policing and violence. The funds could provide opportunities to the disadvantaged, reducing crime in communities. Lastly, abolition can transform productive forms of justice, such as restorative justice programs or education. The transition out of a system of policing and criminalization and into a new world of tolerance and peace.
Why abolition and not reform? Reform simply takes the policing system and tries to tweak and adjust it in an attempt to make some aspects better, creating an illusion of equality and change. Historically, reform has failed to cause the changes that are required for any true change to occur. Prisons are physical manifestations of racism and oppression that leads to harm-inducing conditions, so changing one policy will never change the route to which these systems emerged. This is why abolitionists believe that the prisons should not even exist, and that their existence is only for capital gain and perpetuates divisions among communities. Without such harsh punishments and targeting, a world of care could be created with mindsets around healing and rehumanization. And finally, some key takeaways. Number 1, policing was created out of racism. Number 2, racism has not gone away, but has only changed forms and is still alive and well today. Number 3, that the prison industrial complex was created to house unwanted members of communities. Number 4, prisons have become capital-making machines and are heavily involved in capitalism. Number 5, reform is only surface deep and does not address the root issues. And number 6, although abolition may not be the solution, it is a potential solution to this ongoing crisis. If you are interested in learning more, we highly encourage you to take a look at some of these fantastic reads we used in this presentation. There's American geographer Ruth Wilson Gilmore, whose book The Golden Gulag about abolition in California helps set the stage for talks about prison abolition today. She currently has a book coming out in February 2022 called Change Everything: Racial Capitalism and the Case for Abolition. Some other recommended reads include Canadian journalist Desmond Cole's The Skin We're In about anti-Black racism in Canada, as well as Canadian writer Robin Maynard's book about policing Black lives, state violence in Canada from slavery to the present.